The Down to Business podcast is sponsored and produced by Rex Real Estate. Folks, there is no longer any reason you should be paying 6% commission to a real estate agent to sell your home. Rex sells homes for the lowest fee in the industry, period, at 2% total. That saves consumers thousands of dollars per transaction. With Rex, you get a full service team backed by technology. Rex doesn't market homes the way traditional agents do. They use big data and machine learning to attract hundreds of qualified buyers directly to your home the moment it goes on the market. Get started now by visiting rexhome.com. Welcome to the Down to Business podcast. I am your host, Eric Rothman. Thank you so much for joining us on this first episode of Season 1. We have a really great lineup of guests this season, 5 episodes in total, premiering once a week. And we really have a great episode today to start things off with our guest, Scott McNealy, former CEO and co-founder of Sun Microsystems. Before we get to the interview with Scott, first a quick word on exactly what this podcast is, what you can expect from it. And really, we've all heard the saying, success isn't granted, it's earned. And obviously that sounds simple enough, but what people don't tell you is about the countless hours of tinkering, the sleepless nights going over every small detail, and the decades of trial and error that go into earning success. Down to Business is a show that's going to bring you some of the world's foremost business leaders to talk about the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations, and how they got to where they are today. We have a really great guest list this season, and as I mentioned already, Scott McNealy on episode 1, and in the episodes to come, you'll hear from Amit Singhal, the former senior VP of Search for Google. You'll hear from Diana Nelson, the chair of Carlson Company, former owner of the Radisson Hotels and TGI Fridays chain. You'll hear from former Best Buy CEO Brad Anderson and Alan Wexler, who is the CEO currently of Publicis Sapient, one of the largest digital ad firms in the world. So really great lineup, and without further ado, let's get to the conversation I had with Scott McNealy about his time coming up in the tech industry, grew up in the Midwest, moved to Silicon Valley, and really developed Sun Microsystems from the ground up until it was a $1 billion plus company. And he was with them for over 2 decades, a really fascinating story. So here is the episode and the conversation with Scott McNealy.
Does my hair look all right?
You look good. Yeah, your hair looks great. Well dressed for a podcast. You got your iced tea, you're ready to go. So I was doing a little bit of research about you and your background. So you're originally from Indiana, is that correct?
I'm a Midwesterner.
Midwestern guy.
Yeah.
And your dad worked for American Motors. You grew up in the kind of the car industry.
Yeah, I lived I was in 8 schools by 8th grade, moving around, and then we ended up in the auto industry in Detroit, and he was vice chairman at American Motors, and my first car was a Gremlin X with 3 on the floor, straight 6 with racing stripes.
So why bouncing around so much? What was the reason for moving when you were younger?
Well, the FBI kept catching up with our family, and so we had to kind of pack up and move, but mostly it was because Dad just got a new job and was moving around. He's a Harvard MBA and pretty ambitious, and he worked hard, and whenever he said, all right, everybody in the den, we knew that meant we were moving. So we'd all go to the den and find out where the new place was going to be.
Did you, obviously I moved around as a kid. It's not always the easiest thing, but did you appreciate the reason behind why you were moving? That your dad was, getting new opportunities and jobs elsewhere?
A lot of times I've managed a lot of people, and I said, we'd like you to move to so-and-so. Oh, I can't disrupt my kids. I moved 8 times in the first 8 years, 8 schools, and it didn't harm me, and I didn't know any better, and kids are incredibly adaptable, and it's probably a good thing to learn how to deal with learning your way around a new place. It's all part of learning, out of school learning, and I think out of school learning is the most valuable thing you can do.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was born on the East Coast, but then grew up in the Midwest, and I think that I really appreciate the fact that I grew up in the Midwest now that I live in Los Angeles. Do you have that same appreciation for growing up in the Midwest?
The people I run into and bond with immediately tend to be transplanted Midwesterners, and I can't say that I've ever felt totally comfortable and at home here on the on the left coast, but it's been good to me economically, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in tech, but my boys know nothing but Palo Alto, California, but they're starting to learn. My oldest is off on the Web.com golf tour, and he's going to Louisiana and Mississippi and Indiana and Tennessee, and he's seeing
eye-opening.
He's seeing what some of the places I grew up, and my youngest son just decided, hey, he wants to get out and go somewhere different, so he's going to go to Baylor and play on the golf team at Baylor in Texas. So they're all going to learn the rest of the world.
So how did you get from, growing up in the Midwest to ending up on the West Coast? How did that kind of come about?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and then I got into Harvard and Stanford undergrad, and my mom said, go to Stanford and be a playboy, and my dad said, having gone there, go to Harvard and make something of yourself. So like a dummy, I went out to Harvard, and I didn't terribly enjoy the experience. I don't totally relate to a lot of what goes on the Ivy League campuses, and it was cold. But I came back to the Midwest, worked for a couple of years, and then finally got into Stanford Business School, and I went out and tried Stanford for a while. But I came back to the Midwest for one more winter and decided I'm going back to California. And I ended up in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley and ended up starting a company. And things changed very quickly from that point on.
Yeah, I'm sure. Did you, once you were out in California, starting a company, working in Silicon Valley, did you feel like an outsider having grown up in the Midwest and maybe grown up quite differently than a lot of your peers?
I'm not sure. I think the thing that helped me the most in starting a company was growing up in Detroit with my father, who was vice chairman of American Motors and president of AMF, and he ran an ad agency. As I got to know all of the senior execs in the auto industry, and I felt very comfortable at the age of 11 on playing golf, being at parties with them, being at the swim meets with their kids and that sort of thing, as I felt very, very comfortable around senior executives. So when we started Sun, I had no problem calling high, dealing high. I understood everybody can top a golf ball just like me, and so it was I think very helpful in just not worrying about or being intimidated by people in positions of financial strength.
Yeah. So when you're starting Sun, kind of walk me through was there a goal in mind? Was there a business goal, or was it more of, we have this idea or this product and we really want to see where it goes, but there wasn't really maybe the grand plan behind it, or was there when you first started?
It's a little of all of the above. I believe in the book Accidental Empires that was written about the Silicon Valley. I never read it, but the title is perfect because I think very few people other than maybe Steve Jobs could actually go out and start another company and make it successful. Very few repeat superstar entrepreneurs in the world. Then there's the just plain being lucky. Ignorance is bliss. I didn't know any better. So my goal has always been goals only limit you. So try not to have too many. But I was hoping maybe I could make $2 million someday. I thought I could put $1 million in the bank and live off of that. I could buy a house for $500,000. And that was when you could buy a house for $500,000 in California. And then I would use the other $500,000 to just spend and be crazy. So, that was my goal.
Sounds like a fun plan.
That was my goal. But we sort of hit that goal very, very early, which is why goals can limit you. So did we mean to change the world, the technology world? Did we mean to create major components of the World Wide Web? No, we didn't know what all of that was all about. We had our heads down, and we were just hiring really great people and inventing really cool stuff and innovating in business models and, working 80, 90 hours a week and having a ball doing it.
So when you're starting this and things are starting to get going and you're starting to get a little bit of momentum, being young and it being a young company in and of itself, was there a chance, and maybe this is not necessarily just specific to Sun, but any business, was there a chance that you could have missed the boat? Even though you had this great technology, this great product that would end up being super successful, was there a chance that it could have just been just that and not achieved what it did?
There were multiple moments of near annihilation, And we sort of knew some of them at the time, and other times we didn't realize, that we could have made a different decision and things could have gone really badly. But early on, our number one competitor was named Apollo. They did workstations, technical workstations, which is how we started for engineers. And they had 3 out of the 4 major computer-aided design applications running: Autotrol and Cadence and Mentor Graphics, I think, were the 3. But the big one that had 40% of the market share was computer vision. But they hadn't decided which workstation to go port their software to yet. And we were in a battle against Apollo. If Apollo won, they would have had 95% of the computer-aided design software locked up, and Sun Microsystems goes away. So we put our best bid together, and we were working hard with the purchasing department. And I remember I was sitting with Vinod Khosla, who at the time was the CEO, and I was a co-founder, sitting in his office, and the phone rings, and he picks up the phone, and it's computer vision. And they said, "Hello, this is purchasing from computer vision. We want to let you know that we have decided to go with another competitor, and we are formally cutting off all communications with Sun Microsystems. Thank you for your interest. Click." And Vinod Khosla is a fairly dark-skinned Indian, and he went pale. To tell you how he and I felt about this. I looked at him and went, "Oh, crap, now what do we do?" And I'll give Vinod credit. He says, "We're going to put a proposal together." I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we put a proposal together. It was like 2 o'clock when we got the call, and we had till 5 o'clock or 5:30 when FedEx left to get the proposal done. And so we gave them design rights, put our designs in escrow. We sketched out the spec of a killer machine, priced it super aggressively, gave them manufacturing rights, all kinds of crazy things that you don't, gave them access to source code that you don't do. And then we put it in a proposal, and we got it to the FedEx person just in time. We sent it to about 12 people at Computer Vision overnight. And then Vinod and 2 of our engineers got on a red eye, and I watched the shop back home, and they flew red eye and showed up at the Computer Vision offices the next morning when they opened up. Nobody would come talk to them. They called, nobody would come down. Finally, at about 11 o'clock, after FedEx had delivered, somebody came down and said, "Hey, I can't be seen with you. You guys need to leave. Your proposal is very interesting. Stay tuned." And so they came back home, and we sat and we waited. And then later that week, we got a phone call from a computer person that said, "We want to meet you in Chicago. Don't tell anybody. We want to meet you on the weekend. Bring a printer and a lawyer, a contracts lawyer, and somebody who can sign for this document." And we went through there, renegotiated the deal. They got upset with Apollo because they were being too obnoxious in the negotiation process. And Monday morning, we signed the deal with Computer Vision. And so literally that whole process was one from, talk about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. That was totally it.
Well, there's a couple of things you can take away from that story. And one being, I wonder what the outcome of Sun would have been if you hadn't have been backed into a corner like that. Not necessarily if you would have won or lost the bid, but what you were forced to do when you really had no other option.
Yeah, you can't run the regressions. You're kind of, there's no dress rehearsals. There's no play acting on all this stuff. You just go and react. And one of the things I've learned over time is no business is ever lost. It's only postponed. No contract. You just eventually you'll get the deal if you keep working at it.
You mentioned earlier, you kind of have this philosophy of not necessarily not setting goals, but not letting the goals limit you. And do you feel in this situation that you had with Sun that, had you have really set in your way goals that you didn't want to deviate from, that maybe that would have stopped you from alternating and changing the proposal to what it ultimately became?
Yeah, I definitely think. Every step along the way, I just like to go to bed at night absolutely exhausted and thinking, I moved the ball as far forward as I could possibly move it today, and I always slept like a baby because of it. I didn't feel like I wasted the day. I may not have been successful in everything that I was going after, but I was successful in giving it a good try, and that's all you can do. And that's sort of what I tell my boys when they go play golf. You should say, "Did I try hard on every shot?" So what? I shot 80.
I'll take an 80.
That happened. My boys get a little disappointed in that. But that's got to be the deal. Is did I try hard, and did I do everything I could to make it a little bit better each day? And ultimately, the results will show up. You kind of have to believe that.
What's more difficult, taking a business from 0 to 1 million or 1 million to 1 billion?
I will tell you it's more risky to do the latter, because if we're going from 0 to 1 million, if you fail and blow up and nobody knows, nobody cares, nobody reads about it, all the rest of it. But, Jeff Bezos blows it at Amazon, it'll be one of the most colossal crashes ever, right? And you see what's happened to some of the behemoths that have just ultimately gotten Ubered. You disrupt a lot of lives, a lot of market value, a lot of grandmothers' pensions and that sort of thing. So, it gets a lot riskier the more successful you get.
You mentioned earlier that there's very rarely repeat entrepreneurs who find the same success twice. Why is that?
A lot of it has to do with timing. I mean, there's a lot of smart people trying a lot of things, but you sort of got to be at the right place at the right time with the right team and the right resources and a little bit of puck luck. The puck has to bounce your way. And sometimes you're early, sometimes you're late, sometimes the team doesn't get along. Sometimes you're in the wrong geography. Sometimes you pick just the wrong market. I'll remember one time we were going heavily after the intelligent set-top box, and we were in a battle with SGI, and SGI won the deal with, I can't remember if it was Comcast or somebody like that, and it was about a $10,000 set-top box that they won the deal with, and nobody's going to. Anyhow, they got diverted and spent a lot of time on that. We lost the business, so we redirected our energies and launched Java.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So sometimes sometimes losing is winning, and that's a little bit lucky.
Yeah.
We tried hard to win the set-top box deal, but ultimately we ended up with Java, and that's a way better asset than set-top boxes.
What's interesting with both that story and the story you told earlier is both of these instances where your hand is kind of forced based on the circumstances that are, negotiating a deal, or, the decision that somebody else makes, not necessarily that you make, that impacts you. When you give advice to people who are starting businesses or people that, you talk with, how important is adaptability in business?
Ready, fire, aim. And then get ready again and fire, and then aim again, right? And then, the right decision is the best decision. The wrong answer is second best. No answer is the worst.
Right.
In action, you don't learn anything from standing there. Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. I'll always prefer to be the windshield. So there's lots of phrases and taglines, and to ask is to seek denial was a kind of a management phrase. I just, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying.
Right.
If you ski down the slope and never fall down, you're not getting any better. So I spent a lot of time just encouraging people to run with it, and they'd come in and say, "Is it okay for me to do this?" I go, "Get out of here. You're wasting my time and yours. Go do what's right." And that tended to get the velocity of the company up. Flat org charts mattered. Vertical org charts slow everything down. Technology has the shelf life of a banana. It's not like Coca-Cola where you can launch new Coke.
Right.
You're too young to remember it.
I've heard about it.
Right. And they launched it a couple of years later. They go, let's go back to old Coke.
Yeah.
You can't launch a new workstation and then 2 years later launch the old one again.
Right.
It doesn't work. Hey, I got an Apple 5 for you. You want iPhone 5? No, I'm just not really interested in that anymore. So, it depends on the business you're in. But in ours, where literally you obsolete your entire product line every 18 months, and employees, I would tell them all that they have a 20% skills obsolescence per year. If they don't retrain, in 5 years they're going to be completely obsolete. And so, we always told them it's 51% your job to retrain, and we have 49% responsibility to support you in that. But you got to take majority control over keeping yourself retrained, or you're just going to get run over. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of how we did it in the olden days.
So it sounded like from growing up and what your dad did and the people you were around, it sounded like you were very comfortable, networking and those C-level executives that you were comfortable going and asking them questions or for help or advice. On the flip side of that, as your company was growing, as Sun was growing from a few people to hundreds, how comfortable were you being a leader?
I wasn't. My dad worked too hard and I think he saw one hockey game of all of my sporting endeavors, and I played all kinds of sports and stuff. He was too busy, and I sat him down one day and I said, Dad, how come, this was in high school, I said, how come you never went to any of my events? He goes, I didn't need to. I saw you were a smart, capable, heading in the right direction kid. I was at American Motors. We had tens of thousands of employees, and if I didn't do my job hard and well every day, there's a chance it could go bankrupt and they would all be out of jobs and displacing an enormous amount of people and shareholder value and all the rest of it. So I figured it was better, since you were doing fine, that I worked 80, 90 hours a week. And so I said to myself, that's great, Dad, and it helped. And I appreciated the trade-off he made and felt good about it. And I thought, well, I'm never going to work that hard because I'm going to spend time with my kids and live a little bit more balanced life. But I'll be a good number two. I'll work for somebody who's the boss. I don't want to be the leader. I don't want to have to. And so I always fashioned myself as being Boy Friday, somebody who would help somebody else be successful.
Right.
And when we started Sun, Vinod Khosla was CEO, but he left after 2 years, and the board asked me to take over temporarily, and I said, just temporarily. And decades later, we finally got me out of the job. But all along the way, I had quite an inferiority complex, and it wasn't until the day that I stepped down. My boys were 2, 4, 6, and 8 at the time, and I said, I'm going to go home and be with them. Mm-hmm. I stepped down. I said to my wife, I said, I finally feel like I am a knowledgeable, wise, experienced, and capable CEO, and I'm giving it all up to go be with the boys. It was sort of a weird. I remember the first week I was CEO, I gave a shareholder presentation. First, presentation as CEO, and I did it. I turned my back to the audience. I stood in front of the slides, and I was reading the slides very stiffly, and they're looking at the best side of me while I'm speaking, and all the rest of it. And John Doerr, our board member, hauled me aside and he said, "I'm sending you to New York to speaking class for 3 days to learn how to speak." And so I did that, and ultimately, just through practice, I became a reasonably passable public speaker and became quite a figurehead in the industry because of that. I also, over time, learned to trust my gut. I just didn't trust myself, and that also made me a pretty good delegator, because I would say, "Hey, gang, if you don't make the decision, I'm gonna," and they'd all, "Okay, I'll go. We'll figure it out and come back to you with the answer," which turns out to be a pretty reasonable. I mean, if I was as smart as Steve Jobs, I would have or Larry Ellison, I would probably have had a more directive and central power style, but I was a golf major, not a computer scientist, and so I think I used the style that was best, and people loved working at Sun, and they felt really engaged, and I think we got a lot of horsepower behind it.
Throughout your whole career, whether it be Sun or elsewhere, is there any one thing that you take away as the most rewarding experience or more rewarding thing that you learned over that time?
There's too many to say. It's sort of like saying, what's the best golf course you ever played? And they were all terrific, the best romantic encounter you ever had, they were all terrific, right? So I love the fact that we changed the industry. We pioneered open source. Twitter, all of their technology is built on Java and Sun technology, and the network is the computer, became cloud computing. We really did change the industry in a significant way for a very small company relative to what's going on today. Secondly, we have 235,000 ex-Sun employees, And I think you'd have a hard time finding 1% of them who don't say that they were the best years of their business career or are among the best. So we had a culture of kick butt, have fun that everybody just truly enjoyed. And it's still a very, very strong and tight and networked family of former Sun employees. The third thing that really fired me up was having somebody come up and say, I met my wife, I bought my house, and I paid for my kids' education because of what we did at Sun and the financial rewards that happened. So that's cool. There's a lot of psychic income that came from all of that. Plus, now my boys are all learning and programming in Java, so that's fun.
That's great. Well, that's awesome. And I would love to continue to talk, and I hope that we get a chance to talk again. I know you have a meeting that's about to start, but I appreciate you taking some time. This was a lot of fun, and like I said, I hope to do it again. And
thanks.
Maybe we'll do it on the golf course next time.
Yeah, let's go do $50 a hole. How's that?
Sounds good. I'll have to ask a couple friends to borrow some money. So, all right, thanks, Scott.
Take care.
All right, so episode 1 of Down to Business in the books. Want to thank Scott McNealy for joining us. Really great conversation, and he was really fantastic. Hope to have him on the podcast in a future date to go into a little bit more detail about some of those stories he had from his days at Sun Microsystems. And we look forward to bringing you episode 2 coming up next week. And thank you all for subscribing and joining us on the first episode of Down to Business.